Welcome everyone to our Transformation Literacy Conference. My name is Alina Grün. I am Senior Project Manager at the Collective Leadership Institute. And the Collective Leadership Institute is acting since 2005 as an independent non-profit organization to empower future-oriented people to lead collectively towards a sustainable future. We believe in the principles of cooperation and collectively created solutions across sectors, institutions, nations, cultures, with the focus on SDGs number 17, Partnership for the Goals. Our diverse team from the Collective Leadership Institute is based in Potsdam in Germany and all over Germany actually, in Cape Town, South Africa, also located in New York and Boston, or near Boston in the US, and in Cairo in Egypt. So now you have heard who we are and where we are, and I would love to know more about you. Please feel free to share your name, your country, and which sustainable development goals are most relevant to you in the chat box. In the row of the Transformation Literacy Conference series today, in our sadly last session, we are focusing on regulations. We will explore how binding regulations and voluntary agreements contribute to our ability to steward well-being and the commons. We will learn how every one of us can contribute by demanding as well as designing influential critical policy decisions. But first, let me give you a short program overview. The guiding core question for today is, how do we safeguard the commons and the planetary life support systems? And together with Garry Jacobs, who is the President and Chief Executive Officer of the World Academy of Arts and Science and the member of the International Club of Rome, we will talk about why do regulations need to support social transformations. After that, we will have a short interactive session with the support of an online tool to learn about your perspectives in regard to what kind of regulations and agreements do we need, as well as how an implementation process could look like actually. After that, I'm very happy to talk with Roslina from Malaysia, who is a technical specialist for circular economy at the Malaysian Green Technology and Climate Change Corporation. Together with her, we will explore the development of a roadmap for a regulation framework for implementing circular economy in Malaysia. Further, after that, together with Eveline Rodrigues-Abotsi, who is an international lawyer, research fellow at the Max Planck Foundation in Heidelberg, and the Vice President of the Initiative for Africa, we will discuss how laws can actually contribute to societal transformations. But first, we will have the chance to hear from Dr. Petra Kuenkel, who will give a short introduction to transformation literacy itself, how regulations contribute to it actually, and I think with her experience of more than 30 years in global transformations and leadership expert, we will hear more from her. She's not only the founder of the Collective Leadership Institute, but also a member of the Executive Committee International Club of Rome, and she's also a fellow of the World Academy of Arts and Science. I think for today, we have created the best possible conditions to understand what transformation literacy is about and how regulations actually contribute to that. Petra, are you here? Can you hear me? Yeah.
I'm here. Thank you. Thank you, Alina. Thank you and welcome to everybody. Sorry. Welcome to everybody to this last session of our Transformation Literacy Conference series. And so because it's the last session, I would like to ask the question again, what actually is transformation literacy? I think by now, all those people who are concerned about the state of the world and concerned about our climate, they know the term transformation, and we all know that transformation actually happen, whether we steer or steward them or whether they just simply happen because of also the impact that humankind has on the planet. But transformation literacy is more. It is the skill of different people, different actors, across institutions, across cultures, across countries, across nations, across even, I don't know, thinking and religions, to commit to more consciously transform the world so that it becomes a place where we all are happy to live in, and where we actually fit within the planetary boundaries, as they are called, the limits, that we need to adhere to in order to have not only a thriving humankind, but also thriving life on Earth, and that is biodiversity and the nature that we so much cherish. So the skill to do this together is what is underpinning the transformation enablers, and each of them has marked one of the sessions, one of the conference sessions. So it's about narratives, it is about structures, it is about innovation, it is about metrics, it is about governance, and today it is about regulations, or as I like to call it, guiding regulations, because the issue is that humankind always has been having a need to have some kind of guiding regulations for collective behavior and for individual behavior. And when we talk about guiding regulations, we not usually talk about absolutely rigid rules. Guiding regulations can be many different aspects, but we need to understand that there is an element of us agreeing on a guidance for collective behavior that is helping all of us, even if sometimes individually we may, not believe in it, or we may even be against it. But it is a process of agreeing of what is the foundation of life on our planet, and how can we behave that? That sounds very like up in the clouds, but regulatory frameworks are important in a lot of like very, very concrete issues. And we will have a session on this today. We all know that laws are a part of these binding regulations, part of creating a regulatory framework, whether it is constitutions or whether it is criminal law or whether it is business law. They are creating a frame for the way we act together, we work together, and we produce future together. So that is extremely important. So there are more binding regulatory frameworks, but there are also regulatory frameworks that may be less binding, and where it is important that we commit to these agreements that may sometimes be voluntary agreements, like, for example, standards. What has become much more known in the last 10, 15 years is what is usually called the voluntary socio-ecological standards, whether it be organic standards or fair trade or coffee standards, cocoa standards, textile standards, etc. And it is so interesting that that issue of standards has become more and more important as a way of developing a regulatory framework that people then own and commit to and adhere to. So we need to see the range of regulatory frameworks, the range of guiding regulations between strongly binding, like this is it, and we ought to behave like that, and the other side where it is really about bringing people together, and we will have the example of Malaysia today, bringing people together and really agreeing on a way forward and agreeing on a certain standard of doing things. So with that, I just want to remind us that these guiding regulations are kind of are supportive of our will to save or to safeguard the commons, and they are important for collective well-being. And so it is important that we look at these guiding regulations as something that needs to continuously emerge and further develop. So they need to be reviewed and assessed and then adjusted and improved. So in that way, these guiding regulations are really powerful in steering and guiding collective behavior change. So with that, I would like to look at our first keynote conversation, and I'm inviting Garry Jacobs. Garry, you have been more or less introduced by Alina already. So I can maybe say what Alina did not say, and that is what I admire about Garry. not only that I'm also part of the World Academy of Arts and Science, and you have been the president for quite a while. And what I admire about Garry is that unprecedented commitment to a better world. And so, and the understanding that if we are alone in this, you know, it doesn't have an impact. But if we get together in a community of not only, and that is important, like-minded spirits, not only the people that think exactly the way we think, but together with people who might think differently, so that there is a constant discourse among different people. So I think that's the essence of what you have been pushing forward in the World Academy of Arts and Science, bringing really different minds together, different cultures, different professions. You know, this is so absolutely important. And in one way or not another, what let's say binds people together in the World Academy of Arts and Science is that commitment to a better world and that commitment to safeguarding the commons. So with that, welcome, Garry. Garry, you need to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Petra. It's a great pleasure to be part of this program today.
Garry, we have at this session a big question. And the big question is, how can we safeguard the commons? And with commons, we mean nature, we mean air, we mean water, we mean forests, but we also mean that the culture and the different cultures of people, and we mean that way of being able to live collectively together in peace. So the commons is a wide range of issue, and at the same time we're talking about planetary life support systems. Usually people talk about the planetary boundaries, you know, like these are the limits and we got to work within that limits in the future. So how can we safeguard that? I know it's a big question, but I would like to give you an opportunity to jump into this. What do you think is important looking at today and into the future?
Well, it's the biggest question, maybe, Petra. Maybe the biggest and most important question we can ask. And my compliments to you and to the organization for organizing this program, because I think you're really talking about what we need to talk about much more. And in brief comments, I'd just like to position an answer to this very challenging question. First of all, I think it's important that we understand that we're trying to do something that has never been done before in history. This is unprecedented. And as I liked in your introduction that you talked about conscious transformation. The world, humanity has been evolving for thousands of years in an incremental way, trial and error, and we seem to go in particular directions. We find our way, we lose it and all, but we don't have the luxury of centuries of experimentation and blind trial and error testing now. We've reached a point in human history where the speed of change, the implications and consequences of our actions are so great that, as we all know, we're here because we have to do something right. We have to do it together, and we have to do it very quickly. And that, I think it's important for us to understand, we're trying to do something humanity as a whole has never done before. We have done it on some issue, like banning the landmines, for example, or addressing the ozone layer, but we have never looked at it at this magnitude, where we need the cooperation of everybody on Earth. We need all levels of institutions, from the global to the local level. We don't have the institutions at the global level yet empowered sufficiently to do what needs to be done. We don't fully have the legal frameworks involved. I loved the things you rapidly went through, the stages which we'll be discussing today, because to me, what this meeting is really about is the process of conscious transformation. what are the elements and stages that are necessary for it? And so in an opening remark, I'd just like to briefly say the single most essential starting point, and maybe we come back to this at the end of the sessions, and we can look at it again, is that we recognize, not just a few people at the top, not just some scientists or an academy or political leaders, but that the world population comes to recognize the importance of these changes and is committed to making them. And this is a long process. This is not something that happens overnight. And I don't want to discourage you, but to give the example, slavery was abolished in Europe starting from the 18th century and the 19th century. And in the US, it wasn't finally abolished until 70 years after the end of the Civil War, after the founding of the country. But if you trace all the stages in that process, you see it's a long process from somebody recognizing the importance at the top to the society giving the full commitment to it. Why that's very important is, I'll introduce a thought that I think of law as the codified public conscience. Law is not something we just write down or a parliament passes. Unless the public endorses the law, unless the people support the law, unless we're living in an autocratic society where any law can be imposed by force, and the world is not an autocratic society, even though we have autocratic societies, what's actually going to get accomplished depends on what people accept. And we have countries where during COVID, we could have severe lockdowns and impose all types of regulations. And we have societies in which people rebelled against vaccination or even masks. So this illustrates the fact it's not just a question of getting the laws right. It's a question, the foundation, the social consent on which the laws are based. And then the other elements which you mentioned, which we'll be going through, having the right standards, having the right institutional support, having the right strategies and knowledge and so forth, become very important. So I guess what I wanted to emphasize is we're trying to do something extraordinary, and we've complicated it, as you said, by the fact that we're trying to do it globally in sync. Multiple cultures, multiple nations, people in different conditions with different priorities. Some people worried about global warming and some people relieved that maybe the icebergs will be melting and we'll be able to cultivate the land that we could, different interests and all. How do we create that consensus? And how do we create the enforcement for it? And I'd just like to give one more example. I don't want to overstay my welcome. In 1948, after the UN was founded in 45, the world agreed to adopt the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And now we look on back at it and take it for granted, but it took us centuries and centuries for the first time, for at that time, there were only about 60 countries really that were signatories. There weren't that many countries in the world because we still had colonial empires. But for the first time, the major players in the world agreed that these are the fundamental rights which every human being is entitled to. But there was no legal power for enforcement of these rights. It was a statement of ideals and intentions, but no enforcement for it. Even countries like my own, I'm American, though I'm living in South India now, did not allow any international enforcement, maybe for fear that foreign countries would start claiming that we're not treating our blacks or other minorities properly. It never existed. Now what's happened? That was 48. 2015, we got the SDGs.
I wanted to get there, exactly.
As Jeffrey Sachs said, the SDGs were the embodiment of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in trying to break it down into what do we have to achieve in order to really make these rights real. 17 goals, 169 strategies, and then all the other steps that we have to take, which we're talking about, we're all working in at the local level or the national level, or in our case at the global level, to make it happen. So this is a process that takes time, and we have to go through and be sure we have the support for it. So I hope that by the end of this meeting, we can also talk about how do we build that global support that's necessary for something that can only be done by global cooperation.
Thanks, Garry. Thanks, Garry. That was, kind of touching some of the things that I would actually wanted to ask, and I'm going to go a little bit deeper. Thank you for reminding us of the magnitude that is in front of us, and for the issue that not everybody has fully understood, and that is everybody counts. Simply everybody counts. At this stage, everybody counts. So this means that we are in front of a process, obviously, that cannot be, let's say, steered, like you would manage it. It cannot be managed in that kind of traditional sense, because people wouldn't, wouldn't do what what we would expect them to do. Yeah. So it means there is an important point that you also said. You can only go, let's say, with regulatory frameworks and regulatory guidance without enforcement if the identification with these regulatory frameworks, right, or with the goals is so extremely high. Exactly. So that's why I would like to go a little bit deeper and ask you if you have said, look at the history and look how guiding regulations, agreements on laws, etc., took such long, kind of years, decades, sometimes centuries. Yeah. So, and yet we have achieved the 17 sustainable development goals. Those of us who have been involved know it was an arduous process of negotiation that took years, and some people wanted to give up and wanted to say, it's like never going to work, and some other people said, even if we achieve it, nobody's going to listen to it. So, but on the other hand, if we look at the time now, it's 7 years later, it's the year 2022, and there's a lot still happening in the world that is certainly not supporting the Sustainable Development Goals. But on the other hand, even if you break it down to community level in the Netherlands, I don't know if Frank Landman is here, or in rural Germany, I don't know about rural India and rural US, but people now know about the Sustainable Development Goals. Mm-hmm. And in one way or another, big companies, smaller companies, communities, NGOs, framework, have adopted this as a framework. We know scientifically we can criticize a lot around the SDGs, because you can say, oh, there are too many contradictions, and if we implement them all, we can't survive in this world. I mean, there is a lot of kind of scientific discussion mm-hmm. around this. But if we take it as a voluntary agreement in terms of guiding regulation, how do you see, is that hope for that global consciousness that we actually need for transformations? Would you say it is a milestone, or would you say, can't work?
Well, I think, we're faced with looking at this two ways. What we have done, the SDGs are an unprecedented human accomplishment, just agreeing on them, let alone implementing them. And we've set a very tight time frame, 15 years, to do the whole miracle. And we've never done anything of this sort before, to do it in such a time frame. So at the same time that we applaud the accomplishment, we're frightened of the consequences of not moving fast enough. And so we're critically and cynical of the fact that we are not moving as fast as we should be moving. And I think it's important to keep that in perspective. We need the pressure of that urgency, for sure, for this conscious social transformation that you're talking about. But we have to understand the magnitude of what we're trying to do. Do we have I think the world today has the resources to do this. To do this meaning to implement the 17 SDGs. I believe we have the resources. Maybe we'll get a chance to talk about it. There's $600 trillion in financial resources in the world. There's plenty of money. We don't have a lot of the things we need in order to be sure that all those resources go where they need to go. We have regulations, many regulations that are important for this, from very basic things like child safety, on the products or on food or drugs or we have thousands of regulations that are important for achieving these SDGs. What we don't have, and that's at the local level and at the national level, labor laws and so many things. What we don't have is, we don't have the legal power for enforcement and implementation at the global level. Our populations can be subject to law if, in fact, the government and the society wants to, but the world population, we don't have that. To take one ludicrous example, which was close to the work of the Academy, because we were founded by people, a lot of eminent scientists who were concerned about nuclear weapons, and some of them had developed those weapons and lived to regret it deeply. We got the NPT, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty in '68, which agreed that nobody else will develop these weapons and that the nuclear powers will negotiate in good faith to eliminate the weapons. But after half a century, we still have them, and we even have somebody saying that they'll use them. And this is of magnitude for everybody in the world, because if anybody starts using nuclear weapons today, the impact on climate would be unimaginable. It would set us back. We can't imagine what would be the impact on climate and food and other things. What I'm saying is, we don't have today, in spite of this, the legal framework to enforce something that's absolutely essential for the survival and future of humanity. So this is maybe a topic beyond the scope of what we're planning today, but the growth of the multilateral system, the growth of international law, and binding law at the international level, and the authority to enforce that law. By the way, we have the law now, but we don't have the authority or the power to enforce it. And so having the law is important, but if you can't enforce it, essentially, we're not there yet. And so that's what I meant by this as an evolutionary challenge. We've got to be working at all levels. We have to work at the local level, as I hope many of the participants may be doing. We have to work at the national level and get the regulation right and the standards right. But we also have to be working at the multilateral level to reinvent or evolve our global institutions. We're doing it in particular areas, but we're not doing it at the top where we really need it. To put our trust in global institutions and give them the power to make this happen quickly enough.
Absolutely. So it's interesting that you mentioned the different levels, so that regulatory approaches at the local level. If we look, for example, environmental regulations, there is a lot improvement necessary, but basically we have the knowledge, we have the capacity, and so that can be implemented. I'm not saying this is perfect, but we, I think the methods, the methodologies, it's all there, and yeah, it requires a lot of innovation. It requires of steering in different directions. So there is also on that level, there may be an aspect of willingness, kind of a willingness for commitment, and saying, we need to use what we already know. We need to use what we already have. But if we jump then, there are international standards, and the entire movement of standards can probably be advanced. I'm part of an interesting small agricultural project in the northern of Germany, and it's so interesting that they declared themselves their own standards for for the environment. And yes, so they co-developed their own standards, and then the community is using that. So I think that is possible. That is possible. But interesting enough, it's an example. It's a small example of something that also, of course, needs to take place on the global level. And you say it is already there. We do have the UN systems, and we have the UN system for good reasons, because of an experience that if we don't, the world is completely falling apart. I think we're heading towards the world falling apart a little bit more at the moment. On the one side, on the other side, we have so many global movements to combat climate change, to kind of rescue biodiversity, to clean the oceans. So what's in your view, what is the balance that is needed between the institutionalization, which would be the UN way of then also creating binding laws, vis-a-vis the global movements and global alliances and global partnerships?
Well, I think we need all. And what will work in each case depends on the level we're talking about and the preparedness of the society and the people and all. But I'm glad you mentioned the social movements, because in my view, ultimately, our success is there. I see this ultimately it's the society's voice. I grew up in California, and the 1960s, the hippie generation, when the environmental movement was just starting. It wasn't started by government. It was started by people. A lot of them of my generation who said, what are we doing polluting our planet and spoiling our lands and everything like that? It later on became adopted by government when enough people, I grew up in Los Angeles, where the air pollution was so terrible that they had to close the schools sometimes because of it. And then it became law, and then it became lead-free gasoline and catalytic converters and so forth and so on. There is a process to this. So I think of all of the things that we need to do, the thing that is most needed, most challenging, but possible today, because we live in an interconnected, networked world like never before, the most important thing we need to do is build that global social movement, that global consensus, which means building a common global identity, which sounds like a really big task, but it's already happening. The youth are doing it. The youth movements are doing it in different ways. In fact, what we're trying to work on in the Academy is how do we accelerate that awakening and coalescing of global social consciousness and social movements. In fact, we just on the verge of starting a program with the UN on human security. And the UN, they've been talking human security for 25 years and doing it from the top down and the laws and everything. And now what they really want, rightfully, is they want a global campaign. They want to awaken the global society to they've understood that the real power is in the people. It's not just a metaphor. The real power is, but it has to be awakened. It has to be directed. It has to be mobilized. And that's where transformational leadership and cooperation are so important. So I think it's happening, but it can be accelerated. I think a lot will depend on how much we can learn how to consciously mobilize humanity. We have the instruments now, which we never had before. And it's happening in many places, but it needs to be accelerated in our educational system, in our communications, in our media, and in our interaction and work with each other. I think that's the thing, and I'll end with this. The problem for the UN is it's not its own boss. The UN is the customer, the owner of the UN are the 193 nations of the world. And the UN has no scope or authority outside what its owners say. But ultimately, who owns the planet? It's not 193 governments. It's not the governments that really represent humanity. We need a voice for humanity, and we need a way for humanity to express that voice. And I think the UN will really welcome this. They want this because they know it's the voice of humanity that's going to strengthen our multilateral institutions when we insist on something beyond the politics of the individual nation states. That's happening now with the war in Ukraine. It's not the governments alone that have decided to support something. It's the people who have said, this is really critical. And you see the difference. What the governments were reluctant to do, the people have given phenomenal response to. That's the power we need to release for this, to really get to the ultimate goal.
So it's quite interesting. So if I hear this right, then we need to look at a connection between something that is as institutionalized as the UN. I almost am a bit shy to say bureaucratized as the UN. Yeah. So because that's the typical thing, you know, that happens out of a brilliant good intention, that over years and over time you have a certain degree of bureaucratization, and that is understandable because you have these many nations, you know, that are representing
with different agendas.
With different agendas, but also with different personalities leading these countries, and some of them interested in people and others maybe not that in. Yeah, so there are different cultures or different looking at you know, the relationship between governments and people. I mean, there is just a huge variety. And at the same time, so you're clearly saying we need the social movements and we need to learn from these social movements, because actually, if we look back, they achieved a lot. They didn't achieve enough in terms of the state of our world today, but they achieved a lot that we can also learn from.
Absolutely.
And at the same time, we need to, so I'm almost hearing it's a threefold, you know, kind of threefold elements, you know, like the social movements and the support for them, because it is about people, and not listening to people doesn't really help. Not getting into dialogue with people doesn't really help. It doesn't help the future. And at the same time, we need that construction of the UN, because it is already there, number one, and number two, it is like nature, because there's no boss, and that's interesting, because we can learn probably a lot from nature to kind of negotiate things where there is no boss, and at the same time, this needs to be filled in structure in terms of laws, in terms of regulations that then have a certain degree of binding things. So if we now, like, if I ask you, Garry, at the you know, as a last comment, so what's next? What's, given the state of today's world, given the urgency of combating climate change, given the urgency of reinstating or regenerating biodiversity, given the state of the world where we still have, let's say, I would say too much military in the world, you know, because it doesn't help us into the future at all. What are your, let's say, if you could give a recommendation to somebody who would take it up, what would be your three most important recommendations how to move this forward?
Well, that's a great question, and a big question. I would say what we're doing, let me mention what we're just on the verge of trying to do. We're waiting for the final approval of the UN for it as a partnership with the UN. Something you've addressed. We're planning to go to the world on a global campaign for human security. What do we mean by security? Security, as defined by nation states, is army and military preparedness and all. The $2 trillion in global military expenditure, how much did it help us to fight COVID-19? We lost millions of people, a calamity, 1,000 times the impact has been horrendous all over the world. And yet our security investments did not help us do it at all. How much is the military going to help us on climate change? Existential threat to life on the planet, certainly to human civilization on the planet. We've got our priorities wrong. And I'm not saying that we give up national security interests or protecting communities or anything. That's not what I mean. But we got our priorities wrong. Our resources are going in the wrong area. The real things that are of danger to humanity today, COVID-19 has still not played itself out. And then we've got climate change. And now we've got a crisis in the world right nearby you, which is really a human security crisis. The fighting, I mean, it's a horrible crisis, but the real thing that makes it horrible is not so much the exchange of weapons through the military. The fatality rate has been relatively very small, but the millions of people who have been impacted on that. Education, food, water, health care, sanitation, everything needed. So what we're trying to, one of the things we need
beyond
to do,
beyond Ukraine, yeah.
The whole world,
yeah.
The whole world is affected. The price of petroleum going up all over the world, food security, food scarcity is already projected. Even countries like India, which produces surplus in many things, was dependent on Russia and Ukraine for getting their oil seeds and things like that. Where are they going to get it? It's affecting large sections of humanity. And if it goes further, it will affect the economic impact on employment and so forth can affect everybody. So we need a different concept of what security is. It's very much aligned to the SDGs. But when we talk about SDGs, you know, we all have our favorite or something we're working for. Which is the SDG we can survive without? We need them all. We need something that's, you know, when the banks are talking about SDG, yeah, we're investing in solar energy. Great, that's really wonderful. But what about the kids who don't have food or don't have education? What kind of world would we have in if we're all on solar energy and we ignore the other SDGs?
Exactly.
The problem with the SDGs is they're impersonal. We need to make this personal. Security is not what nations need. Security is what people need. And that implies the rights and the capacity to provide. So this is one of the things we think is really important. The UN agrees also, and they're moving in that direction. We have to think differently, in other words. We have to redefine some of our concepts. And the UN system is still founded on the idea of national security. Not human security. So
it doesn't help us.
This would be number one. I don't know if I'll get to three, and I know you have time limits, but I would mention
watch the time. Yeah, exactly. You need to be short now.
Well, yeah, okay. I will mention at least another one and give some thought to it after that. But I think I mentioned that the financial resources are there. It's not a shortage of money. One of our colleagues in the academy on our board, Ketan Patel, he's working with top 100 banks on how they can redirect their resources, $100 trillion, $200 trillion, to redirect it to achieving the SDGs and what's missing and how do we go about that. Another of our colleagues, also a board member in Israel, is working on how do we create financial instruments that really reflect the value of an investment. We have bonds. If you put the money in, you get a certain return, but those bonds may be saving the planet, saving our water, changing we don't have financial instruments that really reflect the positive externalities that we can get from these investments, like in education. There'd be the highest return if we really reflected on the value of our investments in education. They'd give the higher return even maybe than Bitcoin in its upward swings. So we need major changes in the financial system. And another of our colleagues who you know very well from Germany, who's working on, Stefan Brunhuber, who's working on creating new currencies directly for investment in the SDGs and getting some very serious support from leading economists and from banks and all, from central banks. So I think there are things that can be done. It's not that we don't have the money to do it. We need institutional changes in order to do it. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Garry. I think this is a good ending with redefining what security actually means, and also the encouraging note that people and brilliant thinkers are already looking at the meaning of investment. Let me just put it like this, yeah. So because the meaning of investment should be what is it doing, for the future of the world, and not, what is the return, kind of on my personal note. So with that, I thank you very much, Garry.
Thank you.
Fantastic. So I think we're going to continue with looking at the two other topics of regular frameworks for the circular economy, and then later on also on looking at law and the role of law. And I'm handing over now back to my colleague Alina.
Yeah, thank you, Petra, and also thank you very much, Garry, for your input. I could really feel your energy coming through the laptop, and also maybe mixed a little bit with anger somehow. And I think this is the urgency that we should all feel. Yeah, and I think this came through, at least for me. Thank you very much, Garry. Yeah, now I want to give us some time for an interactive session, because we also want to hear your perspectives, and we prepared 2 questions in Mentimeter, and my colleague Andy is going to share the links with you. And the very first question for us is, what kind of regulations and agreements do we need to safeguard the planetary life support system? I noticed that some people were already mentioning it in the chat, yeah, so that we need to take care of the Earth first of all, and then taking care of the other questions, because this is our life support system. Without Earth and without the right conditions, we cannot survive. And so this is something that we want to hear from you. What is your perspective? What kind of regulations and agreements do we need to safeguard the planetary life support system? So you have some time to answer this question right now, and then the second question is going to follow right away, which I'm going to give you already to announce you. The second question is going to be, which process steps do we need to co-develop and agree on behavioral guidance? This question is going to be a topic in the end of the session, but we already want to give you the time to respond to this question also. So which process steps do we need to co-develop and agree on behavioral guidance? And I think to also give you some more time for responses here, I would also look at some different topics, or not different topics, but if we look at regulations or laws, yeah, or resource allocations, these guiding regulations are often perceived as top-down measures which restrict behavior. Yeah, some people would put it like that. But if we look from another perspective for the future generations, so they need to have testimonials of our collective responsibility now. Yeah, so we need to take this responsibility now for the future. If we are not doing it now, I mean, time is passing by anyway. And then in the end, Earth will survive, but humanity not. And this is something that we need to take care right now. And the influence of this regulations, these guidances, they influence collective behavior change, and they represent powerful interventions into our way of negotiating individual and collective interest. Yeah. So some regulations are solid and difficult to change, maybe. So as Garry just said, it needs so much time and so much process to get there, to change them, but we need to start. So, for example, states have negotiated constitutions, business laws have developed there over time, but still all need to be continuously monitored and understood what their contribution is to a sustainable future. If they are not contributing, then the question is, do we still need them? And further, many more regulations have yet to be fully co-developed. Yeah, for example, development policies, agricultural practices, social equity measures, or nature conservation measures. Of course, not all and not everywhere, but there are already some pioneering countries, some pioneering communities who really push this really hard. And guiding regulations are much easier to implement when they are anchored in our willingness to contribute to the commons and collective well-being. Yeah, I think Myra already said that in the chat. And guiding regulations are also much easier to implement when they balance binding agreements and voluntary contributions in the best possible way. But how to find out what is the best possible way? I think this is something that we always need to adapt to the cultural circumstances, to the interests, yeah, so also paying attention to hidden agenda. So maybe some people who are responsible for that have their own hidden agenda, so we really need to take care of that. And guiding regulations are also easier to implement when they are regularly reviewed and their impacts and then the impact and the usefulness are regularly assessed. And I think this is also something that we need to learn in regard to metrics. We already had a session about metrics and narratives. What do we want to achieve and what do we want to measure? Are we actually measuring the right things? And I think now we had some time for answering the first Mentimeter question, where the question is about what kind of regulations and agreements do we need to safeguard the planetary life support system? And I kindly ask my colleague Andy to show us the results, if there are already some. Okay, Andy, thank you. Okay, so it seems that not everyone is sure to respond to this question, but one person tried and said that regulation on fair use of commons and integration of true costs that reflect externalities. So I think I would push back this question for a while. Yeah, so that you can still answer to this question, and you see the Mentimeter links in the chat, so you can still answer to this question. It would be great, and I would love to hear what your thoughts are. It doesn't need to be something very, very precise. Yeah, we don't create a law out of that, but let's inspire each other and take this as a chance for an interactive exchange. So take your chance and respond to the question, to question 1 and to the question 2, which was about which process steps do we need to co-develop and agree on behavioral guidance. And for example, we had the chance in our work to get in contact with people from very different sectors, from civil society, from public sector, from private sector. For example, in a project in Laos, where the focus is on citizen engagement for good governance, accountability, and the rule of law. Yeah, so that the ministry recognized we need much more citizens' knowledge. We need much more engagement of the citizens. Otherwise, we are not sure if we are handling good governance, accountability, and rule of law in the right way. So we need their input, and they're inviting the civil society to complementary support the ministries and contributing to a good governance and the rule of law. Another project which is currently very present and also active is a project in Ukraine, where we worked with regional reform supporters as collective leaders for decentralized healthcare reform, yeah, in Ukraine, because if we remember, for a long time in the post-Soviet area, it was a centralized idea, a centralized system, where the local and rural areas were just conducting these steps that were pushed to them from the central perspective. And now they have the chance to really decentralize their reforms and to understand what each region actually really needs, what are the demands, and to adapt this to these areas. And with the help of this regional reform supporters, we were able to decentralize the healthcare reform in Ukraine. And now more than ever, their connection is much, much stronger, and they are really doing a great job in Ukraine, and really helping their own country to stabilize these decentralized structures, even in these difficult times. So yeah, once established, once experienced, and once practiced, I think people really understand what is the core. It's about human support, mutual support, and understanding of the sources, yeah, and that not only resources, but sources that we need to fight for. And yeah, okay, so I think Andy is telling me that now there are a lot of answers, so you took the chance to answer. Andy, can you share it again, please? Oh yeah, I see that much more answers are present here. So some of you said that international agreement for boundary countries, stricter laws on extraction, production, sale, consumption, and disposal of all materials. Yeah, so this is really focused on the private sector, but also on the sources that we have, so that we really need to be very strict with that. And on the top right, agreement on what the global commons are and binding ecocide law. This is, thank you very much for this comment. Petra mentioned in the beginning, what are commons actually? And I think for some of us, or for some other people, it is not clear yet what are the commons. And I think a global agreement on what is necessary for everyone and what we are sharing all together, this needs to be agreed upon. And then also looking at the ecocide law, this must be understood by everyone. Yeah, thank you very much. So I see much more responses here. Ooh, Andy, sorry, not too fast. Okay, strengthening present conventions on biodiversity, such as IPBES. Thank you. This is very, very interesting. Present conventions, and this is, I mean, this is a good sign that they are already present, yeah, but we need to strengthen them. And regulations which underscore the principles of stewardship of planetary life. Yeah, thank you very much. So this is exactly hitting the point here today. And then giving the short time frame based on the science claims, I would build on something like the Earth Charter. Yeah, like Earth Charter, thank you. SDGs are great means, but as ends, they are too fragmented. And do not prioritize ethical and moral guidance, which I personally feel is what is needed. Thank you for this comment. This is really great. And we need more commitments from the economy sector for a real share of the cost of environmental pollution. Such kind of agreement and its regulation and enforcement by the government is important. Thank you. Andy, the last comment on the bottom, what was that? Yeah, Earth metrics. I think this is also going into the direction that Garry mentioned. Yeah, we need something that is agreed upon at the global society, at the global community, so that we really have a similar understanding. And also can be combined with one answer that was given us above, that we really actually need to understand what are these things about. We need a common understanding, and then we can really fight for it. We can take care of it if everyone understands it. Okay, Andy, thank you very much for sharing the screen. Okay, perfect. Now I'm very, very happy to announce Roslina Mohammed. And I think the question of like which process steps do we need to co-develop and agree on behavioral guidance is really going into the direction of Roslina's input, because Roslina is a technical specialist in the field of circular economy at the Malaysian Green Technology and Climate Change Corporation, and she has more than 18 years of experience in the green technology sector, especially looking at renewable energy, green financing, green SMEs, waste management, and green skills or standards for the skills, as well as the whole circular economy topic. And currently she is the technical specialist for circular economy for Malaysia, and she has experience with involving various ministries in developing public policies such as roadmaps, master plans, as the current Green Technology Master Plan in Malaysia for Malaysian sustainable plastic roadmaps. And she is going to tell us a little bit more about her project, or she's representing a very, very big project where they are implementing circular economy in Malaysia itself. And where is Roslina? Oh, okay. I see that Roslina is currently, because of the internet connection, she's not present right now. That's really sad, but we are still trying to get her back into this conversation. And I think I would then not wait too long. Let's check how it's possible to get her back into this conversation. But then I would say, let's move on and talk to Petra once again, because then we switch the positions and talk first to Eveline Rodrigues-Abotsi. Petra, are you there? Yes, you're there.
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much for taking over so quickly. And we try to get Roslina back into this conversation, but now I'm really happy to hear about Eveline Rodrigues-Abotsi.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Alina. And sorry for that. It happens. Internet connections are sometimes, even in Germany, like not as they should be. And obviously, this is the case in Malaysia. Great. With that, I would like to welcome Eveline Rodrigues-Abotsi. Welcome, Eveline. We are happy to have you here. And just a little bit about you. Again, maybe I'm not going to say what Alina has already said, that you are a research fellow at the Max Planck Foundation, and also the vice president for the Initiative for Africa. But what I'm saying a little bit more about what I know about Eveline that maybe has not been said, and that is your passion for a new economy. Your passion for a new economy that is not only just and environmentally sound, but that is also changing the lives of women, or even an economy, where actually women have much more a say, in the way it's being constructed, and the way the frameworks of the economy are constructed so that the economy works in a certain way. So great to have you here, Eveline. And I would like to start with you, asking you a little bit about the idea. Like we have been talking with Garry about, you've been listening to that. We've been talking about social movements. We've been talking about institutionalization. We have been talking about the UN, and Garry has constantly also mentioned the term laws and law enforcement. And could I ask you to just kind of, from your perspective as an international lawyer, maybe comment on this first. What, from your point of view, in terms of regulatory frameworks and guiding regulations for our future, is the role of laws?
Thank you, Petra. I'm really happy to be here for this very important conversation and to be discussing the role of laws in this process of transforming our societies. So when it comes to the role of laws, I would say that it's twofold. First of all, I believe that laws are shaping people's behaviors and beliefs. So basically, laws are legitimizing and encouraging certain behaviors or certain beliefs, but they can also at the same time penalize others. So there is an active role that laws play in fostering societal development by initiating major change in society. This is for first. And then I would say also that laws are meant to balance different interests in society, and especially when those interests can be conflicting. I remember, for instance, a couple of years ago, there was a scandal in France because the French authorities had allowed the use of a toxic pesticide in the French Caribbean, French West Indies, 2 islands that belongs to France. And that pesticide was actually poisoning the soil, water, and was also affecting people's health and increasing the number of prostate cancer in those islands. And the thing is that the French government knew that this pesticide was dangerous, because it was actually forbidden in the French territory, in the European continent, but it was still allowed in those islands. And what happened is that the French government decided to prioritize the interest of banana producers over the lives of the plantation workers, over environment. And this is a bad example, an example where we see that laws can fail, but at the same time, it also means that laws can set the right priorities. And I believe that one of the major roles that laws have to play is in balancing the different interests and making sure to set the right priorities when it comes to the hierarchy of interest, putting people's life, the life of non-living and living beings at the priority of our regulations.
Yeah, that's very interesting. If you now look back, there's an interesting connection to what Garry said about human rights, and now if you from your lawyer's perspective look at the development of human rights, as a law that has, as Garry rightly said, not yet the real means for enforcement. I don't know how you see that. I mean, like in some countries, yes, in other countries, not. How do you see this developing also if you project it a little bit into the future when we talk about human rights?
When it comes to human rights, I believe that over the years, we've been evolving in the protection of human rights. First of all, most constitutions were protecting civil and political rights. And then over the years, we realized that there are other rights that has to be added, economical rights. And then lastly, making sure that people have access to a safe environment and also environmental protection. I think it is a conversation that is happening, but it is still happening very slow, where we're trying to still implement effectively some civil and political rights that were granted to people centuries before, and we're still struggling to even implement those ones. And now the conversation is also about broadening the scope of human rights to make sure that it is not just about human beings being able to express themselves, being able to take decision over their lives. It's also about us having a responsibility on how, what is the impact of our actions on the planet and on other living beings.
So it's quite interesting. So I know that we've had a conversation. Sorry for my dog. Can't change it at the moment. We had a conversation quite interesting a while ago about the role of constitutional laws versus business laws. And if we now move a little bit more to business laws, what I found extremely interesting for me, it was a bit of an eye-opener, you know, to say, wait a minute, you know, we take business laws for granted as if their only purpose is to serve, I mean, like the business and tax and, you know, kind of whatever, all these arrangements. But you made a quite interesting point that we might have to review our business laws in relation to that future that we all would like to have. And could you just reiterate this? Because that was, for me, it was a huge eye-opener.
Yes, of course. I mean, when you talk about business law, we talk about basically defining what a business is and also how a business should be operating. And what we are observing right now is that the business laws, how they are designed currently, are more likely to hinder sustainability. And I want to explain that. The reason why is because although we know that businesses have a major social and environmental impacts, we still, the main goals of businesses still remain profit. And even when you look at the core definition of what a business is, the pursuit of profit, it's still the main component of the definition of a business. And this has many different ramifications in the legal system itself. For instance, it means that even if the executive, the managers of a company would like to have a view of incorporating other goals than profit, such as, for instance, social justice or environmental protection in their company's goals, it might be very difficult for them to do that, simply because our laws and our even legal system still feels like shareholders' profit is the most important thing when it comes to a company. And I remember there was a very interesting example a couple of years ago. The former CEO of Danone, which is a multinational food product corporation, had decided to review the goals of this multinational, and by including other goals than just the profit, but also trying to strike a balance between shareholders' value creation and sustainability. And what happened is that this CEO was simply dismissed by the shareholders. And the fact is that our legal system allowed that. Our legal system are not supportive of CEOs that are progressive and would like to incorporate other goals and other purpose for their companies.
So that is an interesting point. Thank you for that, because I do think it's really an eye-opener, because we think about business law as something that is somehow like a given, yeah. So and it may be different in each country, but somehow it's like the basis, yeah. So it seems to be neutral. And the interesting thing is that you're saying it's not neutral towards the future. And that is quite interesting, so that we do not only need to look at the typical kind of laws that come to our mind, you know, like human rights or environmental laws and environmental regulations and enforcement, etc. But we also need to look at the basics of business law that I find quite interesting. So now if you move to constitutional law, maybe, yeah, there are two aspects that I would like to ask you. You're working on, you know, kind of on South Sudan, you know, that's one of your research projects. So can you just tell us a little bit more, because I mean, this is so fascinating, because you know, as we are born I'm born in a democratic Germany, and I take the constitution for granted. I know we shouldn't, and I've accompanied and observed kind of the development of the South African constitution. But what does it mean, and how does it need to take place to develop a constitutional law that actually could take these future endeavors that are in front of us, that Garry was mentioning as the magnitude, that takes it into account?
What does it mean to build constitutions that take in consideration
the future that, the future that we need to be heading towards?
I mean, I think there are different levels. There is, first of all, the content, of course, the content of the Constitution, of course. What do we put in our constitutions? Because constitutions are, in my opinion, a symbolic place of representation of a society, and also of a society's views of the world. So it is definitely very important to know what a society, what are the values that we want to rely on moving forward. So definitely constitutions are a very instrumental legal instrument when it comes to safeguarding the commons. And there's also the process of building constitutions. I mean, constitutions are also a contract, a social contract. What I mean by that is that the process of building constitution, it's also a way of bringing people together and building trust in order to move into a consensus. And all these elements have to be put together in order to make sure that we have the right legal system to support life, to support the commons. And I think we also need to set, to review the values that we have in most of our constitutions now. We need to probably incorporate considerations when it comes to our relationship to living and non-living beings, our relationship to the environment, and also how, and also make sure that we have the duty to preserve the environment.
So it would be quite interesting to actually take all the constitutions of the world and put them next to each other and look at what do they actually contain in terms of that, and what would be the interpretation, and what would need to be amended, towards the future. That would be an interesting job. Mm-hmm. And what just is a matter of interpretation in a particular direction. That may be ignored today, and it's actually part of the constitution, but maybe ignored. So that's a fascinating issue. Eveline, can I ask you about the issue of ecocide law? I mean, you're probably not a specialist on ecocide law, but you're a lawyer looking at it from that perspective of an international lawyer. And it's quite into the debate at the moment, where it says, the people who argue for ecocide law said, it needs to be declared a criminal act, and that needs to be a crime against humanity. And if that existed, then it would have an influence on how businesses would behave. How's your assessment of that?
I believe that it's an interesting proposition. I mean, I think that criminal lawyers should look into that and let us know if this is really realistic. But I believe that it could be a very interesting proposition, simply because, especially for massive destruction of environment, we realize that sometimes it's really difficult on the national level for certain domestic legal systems to really be equipped to deal with this type of wrongdoing. And I believe that something that Garry mentioned previously that was really interesting is that we need to work at the multilateral level. So I believe that having such passing such a law would be also interesting, because it can trigger a global conversation on how to best provide justice when it comes to this type of crime, and how to also adequately compensate not only individuals or communities, but also make sure that we can provide environmental restoration. And the question of also prevention of those crimes is definitely important.
That's quite interesting. So you're kind of building the bridge to say laws, what Garry said, are not just what is in writing, kind of what is in there in terms of content, but also what is the conversation that is engendered through developing this law. That's a very, very important point. And can I just ask you, Eveline, just to summarize from what we have been talking, just in a nutshell, 3 elements that you say are the most important elements of laws that actually can guide us into the future.
All right, sure. If we have to think, if I had to pick 3 elements, I would say the first element would be definitely redefining our values and redefine our priorities. And I remember also Garry mentioning that we've got our priorities wrong. So definitely laws are a way to get our priorities right, and making sure that the pursuit of profit or productivity should not take precedence over all forms of life preservation and human dignity. This is for one. I also think that, but this is not something that we've been necessarily discussing before, but I think that there is also the need for reinventing the different forms of collective property, because we are, in our constitution, protect individual property, but I think that we are struggling to identify what are the common goods and how we can also collectively protect common goods. I remember studying pre-colonial African societies and seeing how land, for instance, was only collectively owned. So an individual would not be able to own a land individually. And the reason for that was simply because land was so important for communities, for people, and also for environmental preservation, that it was essential that it remained a common good, and that it would be protected by law. The third element that I want to mention is probably making sure to have more ways of people expressing their views, and probably looking into deliberative mechanisms that we can put in place to make sure that people can express their opinions not only during political elections, but also in their daily life, in the workplace, in school, and everywhere, to make sure that we have our priorities right and also our leaders are accountable.
Thanks, Eveline. Thanks. It was a really good summary. I wanted to take notes. So wonderful. So thank you. We hear that Roslina is back. I don't know, Alina, if you, can you let me know? And great, Eveline. Thank you so much. This was a very interesting, very good kind of wrap up and a summary of our discussions today and the role of laws. So wonderful. With that, I would like to hand back to Alina and hope that everything is fine and we can invite Roslina.
Yeah, thank you, Petra, and also thank you, Roslina, for your input. Very important perspective for those who are not working with law and regulation, especially also for me. This was really interesting to hear what is actually possible and what would be the necessary 3 steps. And I just saw that Roslina was present, but now she's not present anymore. I think her internet connection is very unstable.
Hi, hello everyone. This is Roslina Muhammad. I'm from Malaysia, and today I'm going to share with everybody Malaysia's journey towards circular economy for plastic. Okay, to go further, let's take a look at the vision first. What is the vision? In 2018, the government of Malaysia, under the Ministry of Mastek, has launched Malaysia's roadmap towards zero single-use plastic, which is in 2018 until 2030. And in this roadmap, one of the action plan is basically to have circular economy plastic roadmap by 2021, which is implementation by 2021. So in this roadmap, to include also extended producer responsibility. And the next question that we asked, I mean, you perhaps wanted to know, where is it coming from? I mean, where is it coming from to have this kind of vision, to have the ambitious to go for a circular economy plastic? Because if you take a look at the chart here, you can see Malaysia actually include top 10 countries polluting the ocean. So it is very embarrassing, which is we are at number 8 mismanaged plastic waste entering the sea. So this basically a turning point for us, that we're thinking, our government think that this is embarrassing for Malaysia. And also there's a newspaper write-up say that Malaysia is the world's top dump site for the plastic waste. So the government think that they have to do something. So the next question is, where's the starting point to think of this vision? So to start off with this vision, basically the government of Malaysia doing a very drastic action where Malaysia bans import of the plastic waste to Malaysia. And from this banning basically is changed the ecosystem of the world, where China, because is affected to some other countries that sending those plastic to Malaysia, but we are banning those import of the plastic waste. And another action that we done, there are certain numbers of states in Malaysia. In Malaysia, we have 13 states. So a few states have accepted, voluntary accepted of the 20-cent pollution charge in the federal territories, in the Selangor state and also in Penang state, where the consumers that wanted to buy, the consumers went for groceries, if they wanted to have a plastic bag, they have to pay 20 cents. So that is considered a pollution charge. And it was very good, and basically it has been adopted by some other states as well. Okay, now let's go for the container of change. So in the container of changes, we are asking ourselves, who are the stakeholders? I mean, who are the stakeholders our government of Malaysia engaging? Who? They are, so actually we divided into various, which is a government, manufacturers, SMEs, and also industries, civil societies, NGOs, association, financial institution, academia, and some others that is some other groups. So we are basically grouping them into these categories. And if you take a look at the manufacturers, SMEs, and also industry, where we looking into the whole value chain of the circular economy, especially those with the raw materials, those with the production and consumption, those that design and also production for like eco design, and the one in the distribution and also retail lines. At the same time, we take a look at the buying and also using, which is a consumer, and also the waste treatment, recycling, association, and so on. So the whole, we take a look at the whole value change when we go to the industries. And at the same time, there are also international support. So international support that we receive basically from the World Bank. World Bank World Bank actually have funded to do studies, especially to do a market studies for the plastic in Malaysia. And at the same time, somewhere in 2019, we have Ellen MacArthur Foundation and also UKREP came down to Malaysia, have an engagement with stakeholders, and also giving us a lot of advice and so on. And we also have, the UK plastic bag and also REP UK. And for the REP UK, we even have collaboration with our organization under the under supervision of the Ministry of Environment, where we developed 3 guidelines, and also 3 guidelines which is include training for SMEs for pertaining to the plastic reduction. So this basically part of the container of change and the stakeholders that the government of Malaysia engaging. Okay, when we talk about the process architecture, how does the process architecture look like to move our vision further and also achieve our sets of goals? So what kind of activities that we do? Actually, we've done a lot of stakeholders engagement. There's a lot of stakeholders engagement, especially during the COVID-19. We're doing the whole thing during the COVID-19 for the 2 years. There's a lot of stakeholders engagement, and also some guidelines that we done. At the same time, we design a training, we're giving a training, coaching, and also awareness program. And towards the end by 2021, we come up with a drafting of the roadmap, and we table the government of Malaysia table to the parliament, and it get approved. So looks like at this point, looks like our vision is happening. So I would like to go to the next slide. Okay, I mean, when you want to design something, you definitely needs to take a look at what are the tools that we use. So for the drafting of this circular economy plastic roadmap, some of the tools that we use is basically a document, is a country's document, government of Malaysia's document, studies, and also some of the policies. And at the same time, we do have studies from the NGOs. Like here, if you take a look at the 12 Malaysia plan, actually this plan has been launched in 2021, and this plan is supporting very well with what we are doing, because in this 12 Malaysia plan, finally Malaysia introduced circular economy, and also those those companies and those program which met with this 12 Malaysia plan can be able to apply for the budget from 2021 until 2025. Can apply for the budget. If the program is good, they will be able to get a budget to implement the program. And if you take a look, here is a market study for Malaysia, which is done by the World Bank. So the studies is for the plastic circularity, opportunities, and also barriers. You can go to the World Bank to download these studies, and at the same time, there is this project from COPC and UNEP, where they come up with this national marine litter policies and also action plan, and this action plan is for 2021 until 2030. And this program is from our Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Environment, Water, and Ministry of Environment and Water, and lead by the there is a organization named MIMA. Okay, for the studies on the EPR's case assessment for the plastic waste in Malaysia, this is done by the WWF, and this studies is very good, where is also part of the document that we refer when we talk about the EPR in Malaysia. So these are not only limited to this, where we also have a white paper by the Manufacturer Association of Plastic in Malaysia, and also there's a few of the documents that we referred to. Okay, just now we we take a look at the tools, and that tools is basically the documents, all the documents reference. But now let's take a look at the tools which is relevant to projects relevant. So there are a few projects relevant which is from the international funding that's supporting the SUP prevention. So one of them is a collaborative action for single-use plastic prevention in Southeast Asia, which is under GIZ. And this project, they have about 4 components. Component 1 is for the EPR policy support, and also capacity building. Component 2 and 3 is supposed to have eco-design and also market research. And for the component 4 is for the pilot project which they done with the local government. So these are the project, this one of the project that supporting the SUP prevention. So they are giving some help, they support the government of Malaysia. And another project that is has concluded successfully, which is under Sea Circular project, and this is from the UN Environment, UNEP. And this project is they have about 7 activities, and one of the activities that I mentioned just now, which is the policy, marine litter policy, previously that has been launched. So this under this project, Sea Circular. Okay, now the question that we need to ask of how we overcome challenges. Just to let everybody know that there's a lot of challenges and how we overcome, especially here in Malaysia. About 3 years ago, we have these changes of government and administration. Is some kind of like political tsunami where the administration of government administration for 60 years has been has been defeated by a new opposition government. So we are changing a government, and then and after that, after a while, then we change another government again and again. So how do we overcome it? Because we are quite lucky, because all the ministries that is in the all the ministries supporting these initiatives. So we are continue. So we are the same stakeholders, same vision carried through even with the government change. And in my organization as well, we do have a lot of changes, but I stay true and I follow through the same vision. I carry through all the work and everything the same. Even though I have to change the department, but still my work I'll carry with me. I'll carry with me and continue doing the same work. So that's how we overcome the changes. And how we overcome the COVID-19 lockdown. So I believe there's about 2 years that I work at home. I totally at home. I work at home, and we had a lot of online meetings. So we done everything online: meetings, stakeholder engagement, discussion, everything online. Even the short discussion, even the long discussion. We do meetings daytime. We do meetings nighttime. So there is a lot of meetings. So everything we done online. And the next challenges is basically industry lack of knowledge and expertise. So these challenges, how we overcome, we put up in the action plan in the roadmap, where focus on the SEPA, which is capacity building, education and public awareness, and also to train the trainer. So this is the one of the implementation program that's in the pipeline that we need to do. And then no incentives. There's no incentive available for the circular economy. So what is in the action plan? Basically, to leverage on the current incentives that available in Malaysia by enhancing it and extend it to the circular economy business model. So that means instead of you come up with a new incentive, you leverage on the old incentive, where you come up with you added new criteria, new SOPs, new guidelines into the current scheme. So from there, it will shorten the progress. I mean, it will shorten the process of approval of that scheme. So that is already in the action plan of the roadmap. And then there are different acts between federal government and state in the ways of waste management in Malaysia, where in Malaysia we have 13 states. So 6 of the states are following the I mean 7 of the states following the Federal Territory Act. The rest of the states is not. They are following their own local governments act. So how we do it with all the action plans in the roadmap, combined with the Malaysian plan, 12 Malaysia plan, all states can follow same direction and move towards same vision, even with the different acts. So that means if they're following this roadmap, everybody moving together with this roadmap. So regardless which states you are, if you are which government you are, either you are opposition or you are the federal states government, you will if you follow the roadmap, because the roadmap is for Malaysia. So if everybody follow the same roadmap, they you will definitely arrive at this destination the same with everybody. And the next challenges that we have, basically unclear roles and responsibility of the government. So this one also where we put in the action plan, where but we do some drastic action where we identify which organization and what is their role. So in the roadmap, instead of we just mention this is for mention like giving them a hint. No, we just pin their name at the roadmap. Okay, this is belongs to this organization, and this is the action plan. So they have to do it within until 2030. So yeah, and then when we do some refining of those roadmap, everybody seems to be agree. So it's good, everybody agree to take that responsibility and to take that challenge. So that's how we overcome. And cross-function ministries, yes, we do have cross-function ministries, where if for the ministries of environment and water, which is the one that is leading this Malaysia sustainability plastic roadmap, they only their jurisdiction is more or less on the plastic itself. But under Ministry of Home and Local Government, all the raw material is under them. But what we do is basically our government, they sit down, they discuss and they harmonize. Okay, this is what we're going to do. Can we just do, can we take only this one? So they say, okay, since you are moving further, we can see you have, you already have many plans for it. We're going to let you do it. So when we do the bigger roadmap, we can just include whatever that you have action plan into our roadmap. So it harmonized. So everything seems to be very good. So that's how we overcome our challenges. Okay, now this is what we achieve. We achieved Malaysia Plastic Sustainability Roadmap 2021. So finally, December 2021, our Ministries of Environment and Water launched this roadmap, where we have the objectives. There are 3 objectives here. So one of it is sustainably address plastic pollution in Malaysia, and number 2 is to provide guidance and also promote sustainability business practices, and number 3 is to harmonize action along plastic value chain. So these are basically the 3 objectives, and also they are focusing on the scope, which is 4 scope: PET, HDPE, LDPE, and also PP. The one that this scope, if you take a look, they are basically the one that can be able to recycle. And then the strategies is about 4 strategies, and one of them is building capacity for reprocessing and manufacturing of recycled products and national. And also we have targets. The target is the first target is to phasing out problematic SUP. Number 2 is 25% post-consumer plastic packaging to be recycled by 2025, and number 3 is 100% recyclability of plastic packaging by 2030, and number 4 is 15% average recycled content by 2030. So this is basically what we have achieved. Okay, this is also what we achieve. I'm just going to take out my picture here. Okay. This is what we achieve. Basically, while we are having to launch that Malaysia Plastic Sustainability Roadmap, we in Malaysia, Maria is actually Malaysia Recycling Association is the first producer responsibility in Malaysia, which supporting EPR for the plastic, and they launched in January 2021. So Maria is so their business model is EPR, where a voluntary industry driven solution to tackle consumer packaging waste in Malaysia. And they have about 4 aims, which is for the consumer, separation at source, for the waste collection, where waste collection, the recycling sector, and also federal government. So that is basically their aims. And the action plan, there are action plan that we have put into the roadmap. Okay, okay, this is the latest achievement. Yeah, the latest achievement, you can see it's a lot of colorful because this is what's happening right now here in Dubai. I mean, it's happened from the 27th to 31st of March 2022, where Malaysia has a pavilion in Dubai, in World Expo Dubai. And during the week 26, from 27 to 31st of March, where we had the circular economy plastic roadmap. Circular Economy Conference, yeah, Circular Economy Conference, and that week is for, the theme is for the circular economy. And what we did from Malaysia, we bring in the Malaysia delegation companies with the circular economy business model, and some of them is a startup company, so it's a small companies, but they have the circular economy business model. So I can see there's a lot of pictures, they're having a blasting, they're having the circular economy conference, and they even have the business matching, and they even and also at the same time, very fortunate where our Prime Minister is there. They are visiting Prime Minister, so it was very colorful, and everybody seems to be happy, and there is a lot of business leads that's happening. Hi everyone. That slide was my final slide for Malaysia's journey towards circular economy plastic. And now I would like to take this opportunity to thank CLI, especially Dr. Petra, Kuenkel, and also Alina and Miss Alina, and also Mr. Andy for a great workshop and also training that we have done last year. So and the training was my participation was funded by GIZ under the CAPSI project, and I enjoy it so much, especially approaches to changes, where they taught us how transforming individual consciousness through, and how transforming information flows through. And also the next one was like this chart looks like snail, where building collaboration system that works, where the dialogue change model. So we're asking a lot of questions while looking for the answers and looking for the solution. We need to ask a lot of questions. So I learned a lot in this workshop, and I wanted to say thank you, and I would like to to credit the CLI, and hopefully one day I can be able to attend other program from this workshop, from this CLI Institute. So thank you very much.
But let's move on, because we still have one open question in Mentimeter, where the question was about the process. Yeah, so that what you think, which process steps do we need to co-develop and agree on behavioral guidance? And I kindly ask my colleague to share the answers to that in the word cloud. Yeah. So when we see in the middle, so most of you said we need global dialogue. This is very interesting, because it means that most of you who responded really think that this is the first step that need to happen. And for that, we also need to think about what kind of skills do we need to have this global dialogue? Yeah, what kind of platforms do we need for global dialogue? As well as some of you said trust is very important. And I think this is actually the base for everyone to get into a conversation and to be sure that everything that we are discussing, everything that we are sharing with each other is appreciated and accepted as it is. And that we can really not only think about being optimistic or, you know, like just saying something, but that we really trust in that out of this dialogue will come out something, and some results will come out of that, and that we really can move on step by step. So we see honesty, yeah, combination between trust and honesty, campaigns, we need moderated open spaces, we need consultations with people, inclusive engagement, environmental projects, regeneration, studies, research, willing, self-awareness, yeah, so how are we actually contributing to this process in co-development, bottom up with top down. Yeah, I think this was also mentioned already in the chat, that it's not only top down or not only bottom up, but we need a combination of it. We need co-creative workshops, understanding each other, inclusive consultations, and seeds of desired futures. I think when we should summarize that, it's actually that people need to get in conversation with each other. Otherwise, this is not working out. And for that, trust and honesty are the base that we can get into global dialogue. Petra, would you like to add something here?
It's hardly possible to add anything, but what is so interesting, and that connects to what Garry has said and what also Eveline has said, is the final regulations, you know, kind of, be there laws, be there binding agreements, be there, let's say, standards, anything, they are not worth a lot, number one, if there's no enforcement. But number two, and that is so extremely important because that comes out of this chart, is that the way they have been developed require a lot of looking at people, listening to people, looking at different perspectives and negotiating the way forward. So I'm actually amazed that global dialogue is so much in the center. And now one could say, you know, this is unrealistic because it just takes too much time. But I do think in my probably longstanding experience is that the investment into dialogue always pays off. Because if the outcome is any kind of standard, any kind of agreement, or even a regulatory framework, or even a law, that it is owned by people in a way that then enforcement is less of an issue. And I'm not saying enforcement is not important. Enforcement is on the route to sustainability extremely important. But what we actually need is that people are okay with that guiding, with these guiding regulations. They are okay with them, and they can only be okay with them if they not only understand them, so this is a knowledge part, but if they have co-developed these behavioral guidance. So this is my comment to this.
Yeah, thank you, Petra. And I think also through the conversation, we can actually really feel each other, yeah, feel the energy that that we are sharing, and the care that we are sharing for our Earth and for our family members, for our friends and their friends and family members, so that we feel this this urge to take care of our globe, of our Earth, so that we can actually survive at it and not extinct. So thank you very much, Andy, for sharing the results, and thank you very much for all participants who contributed to the responses. This is a really, really valuable overview. And yeah, I think now, we are missing Roslina hardly, but I think we now can really look at the last minutes of our last session. That's really sad that we are already ending the series, but I mean, throughout the last 6 weeks, we as the Collective Leadership Institute invited you to this Transformation Literacy Conference journey, to the series with different focus areas to urge the perspectives and enhance paradigm shift for sustainable transformations. And maybe you recognized it, but the 6 mutually supportive transformation enablers are based on the Collective Leadership Compass, which is our core methodology. And each of them is a necessary component to develop transformation strategies that become successful. And their mutually supportive character means that we need to combine them to reach tangible transformative change. And together they function as a stewardship architecture for planning and implementation. So yeah, and now we want, of course, to give you a short recap of what we've learned actually throughout the last 6 weeks. And in the first conference session, where we listened to narratives and what kind of stories do we need to really understand that this urgency is here. Yeah, we need to take the chance, we need to be activated right now. And we learned that narratives are that resonate with people's hearts and minds have tremendous power. They energize people to act, and such enlivening narratives help us to drive transformative change strategically. So whenever you have the chance to talk through these powerful narratives and sharing powerful stories, because they connect with an image of a future that we want to become part of, they help us experience the possibility of achieving change, even in small steps, and they make us realize that our contribution counts, that we can really contribute to that, no matter how big or small the step is.
Exactly, and in the second session, we have been talking about structures. And now, if you talk about structures, the immediate thing that comes to probably my mind is power structures. But there are so many structures, and the interesting thing is life is constructed with structures. Without structures, we couldn't survive. So no matter if it's nature, or if it's our body, or if it's institutions, or if it is bridges, or if it is nation states, it's all in one way or another a structure that is holding things together. So structures have the purpose of identifying with something. That is extremely an important element of structures. And at the same time, if we look at transformations, we need to look at what are the structures that are enabling. And in this session, we had quite interesting conversations about the role of businesses, because they are part of a really powerful structure in the world. And if the role of business and the purpose of businesses changes, then these kind of structures that hold things in place at the moment, and probably also are turning things into a direction that isn't really very helpful for the future of the world. When these purposes changes, the structures change. And that's so interesting that we then moved on to the role of collaboration, cooperation structures, and particularly also networks of multiple actors, of multi-stakeholders, of different people that need to get together. So quite an interesting element of the transformation literacy is to look for structures that actually loosen part of existing structures, and not to completely abolish them, but to create new connections through networks, through alliances, through multi-stakeholder partnerships, etc. And these kind of new structures that are developing are much more enabling for transformative change, and they're almost like laboratories of the future. So that was the second session.
Thank you, Petra. Yeah, and then moving on to the third session. During the third session, we discussed that business need to reinvent the purpose of business itself. We discussed that NGOs need to invent in new ways to care for social and ecological integrity. And we discussed that governments need to guide and finance innovations that serve people and the planet. So the overall topic was about innovations, but innovations not only to invent something and create something new, but in combination that we are looking at regenerative futures. So actually right now, if we think of inventing something or creating innovations, we actually always need to combine it with the future perspective. Yeah, it must be long-term, it must be sustainable. So life-enhancing innovations help us find solution for transformative change, and we can nurture pioneering approaches when we create the space for it, yeah, for this creativity around transformative ideas, when we encourage an exchange of good practices and expert knowledge. So then we nurture risk-taking and self-responsibility so that people really understand, if I'm taking this risk, I really commit myself to create innovation that are focusing on the future in regard to sustainable development goals and much, much further, because the sustainable development goals, they are a nice frame until 2030. However, we need to look beyond that and to create innovations, either in products, either in services, or anything else, so that we need to think of innovations in combination with a sustainable future.
Yes, and the fourth session was around metrics. And what is so interesting about metrics, they can be disempowering or they can be empowering. And I do think with the GDP, we have developed a metric that may, at least now, today, not be empowering anymore. And what is so interesting about metrics, they actually go back to a principle of life, and that principle of life is consciousness. And if I remember, both Eveline was talking about consciousness and Garry was talking about consciousness and how we actually need to move into a conscious transformation. And what is so interesting is that metrics are not just figures, you know, that we can measure. They are not just dashboards. They're actually a translation of an observation, and they're a translation of human consciousness into something that we can all recognize. So that is an important element of metrics. And then the question now is, which are the metrics that are empowering? Which are the metrics that actually we can own and we can agree on? So we discussed the issue of overcoming GDP as a metric that is at the moment dominating us and guiding us in the wrong direction, because what gets measured gets improved, and if we measure the wrong thing gets improved. And that's hence also the issue that Eveline and Garry mentioned, that we need to change our priorities. So we need to find measurements that truly mirror the sustainability that we would like to see in future. And what was so interesting, we also had sessions around not only measuring progress, but measuring process, to have a better awareness of what are the processes that actually help us to collaborate better. What is the quality of collaboration that we actually need to achieve? Because this quality of collaboration is leading to better outcomes, and that makes us faster in transformative change. That was the fourth session.
Yeah. Now the fifth session last week took place. So during the last week's session, we experienced how well-organized dialogues with the specific skills that we need for a transparent dialogue, how these well-organized dialogues, transparently managed and reliably documented, create a level of trust that is really needed to overcome challenges together. And we've heard examples from Ghana, we've heard examples from Lusaka, where there were huge endeavor and actually so many challenges that one would think, how could you actually overcome that? Yeah, but with governance mechanisms and this well-organized and transparent dialogue, it is possible step by step to improve the situation and to get through that. Yeah, to invite different sectors, the public sector, the civil society sector, academia, religious bodies, the private sector, and invite these all, not all at once, but step by step in bilateral exchanges, finding out what is important to them and trying to implement these sub-goals into this overall goal of creating governance mechanisms that are helping us to reach transformative change. And when we look at how can we do it actually, governance mechanisms done well, they help us to integrate perspectives, yeah, and expertise of different stakeholders, and they help us to develop appropriate strategies across these different sectors, as the societal sectors and institutions, and they help us to establish peer reviews and effective formats to scale collective learning cultures. And I think this came through last week very, very clearly, that the appreciation for this dialogue and exchange, trustful exchange, transparent exchange was very present and even almost tangible from the experiences that we've heard last week. And yeah, so this was governance.
Yeah, and now today we had the topic of regulations, kind of guiding regulations, and it's I don't need to repeat the issue around regulations, but what was so interesting now is that all these different transformation enablers actually are married. They belong together. They need to work together, and the session today has made it so absolutely clear that in order to develop regulations that let's say, can be enforced, but don't need too much of enforcement, the way they are being developed is extremely important. So it's quite interesting how social movements can push regulations, and without social movements we wouldn't have them. And at the same time we need to have consultative processes so that people can own the regulations, but once they're there, we need to also have enforcements. And it's quite interesting that all the other elements, the narratives, the metrics, the governance in terms of dialogue, the structures, who's being invited, to co-develop regulations, and what is innovative about them in terms of thinking. All the other elements kind of are important for regulations to actually achieve their goal. So the issue about the stewardship architecture is that if we want to develop really fast transformative change processes, then the stewardship architecture is almost like a checklist, and you can find this. I don't know, Annie, if you can put it in the chat. You can find a background and the possibilities how to use that in the conference briefing. That's quite interesting. But we need to look at the transformation enablers almost like a checklist that helps us. It's almost also a bit of a guiding structure. Yes, so a checklist that helps us to see, how do we have we considered all aspects? Because it is so easy in transformative change to just end up with doing what you're used to do, or end up with doing what you think is important and not integrating the different other perspectives. So the structure kind of based on the collective leadership compass, and based also on the liveness principles and vital systems, is the transformation enablers create a kind of architecture that can be used as a strategy guidance, as a checklist, as a way of checking, have we considered all the necessary aspects? So you can kind of assess your strategy with that, but you can also develop a new strategy. And that's the basis of what we call the stewardship architecture around the transformation enablers, around the 6 sessions. And for each session, we had a deep dive into one of the transformation enablers.
Yeah, exactly. So this is the, let's say, the recap of the last 6 weeks, the journey that we had the chance to enjoy together with you. And if you want to read more, we of course have we have the chance to share with you the book, the open access book. Yeah, so it's for free. The Leading Transformative Change Collectively book, which is going to be pasted in the chat. Enjoy reading it and learn how you with your team, with your collaboration ecosystem, can actually lead this transformative change endeavors, and how you actually can use the collective leadership compass as an observation tool, yeah, to put it in front of your eyes, like lenses, actually, like glasses, and to see patterns of what is actually happening right now, and how can we guide it into the right direction. So we are not victims of the circumstances. We can take the lead step by step, and also exchange the lead with another person, where we realize this person, they have other competences, they have other skills which I don't have, and I can share this responsibility with them, and they are appreciating this sharing. So take your chance, download the book, Leading Transformative Change Collectively. And also, if you then want to know more, we would be happy to welcome you in our open courses, and also in our certification track to become a collective leadership specialist, so that you really on the ground, on your local project or initiative, that you really bring these initiatives into our open courses, that we can observe, discuss what is happening in your collaboration ecosystem, what kind of stakeholder system do you have, and that you are learning to really implement and to practice the tools that you're learning throughout the workshops, the courses, to really act with the collective leadership compass, with the dialogic change model, and to practically use it as a architecture, yeah, as a process architecture, and to really guide the own way that you need for your project, for your local initiative, for your collaboration ecosystem, and to really implement it step by step. And it always sounds very hard in the beginning, and it seems impossible in the beginning, but if you just start with that, then it will become true, yeah. And we don't need to handle the current situation. We can move on, and we can really shift a little bit, step by step, into the direction of transformative, sustainable transformative change. Also, I can tell that we will have a documentation after this series of the Transformation Literacy Conference. So we will have a documentation where you can really read up each session one by one, or a recap of all. So you will have a documentation and a report after that, and I think in written form, but also in video format. So whatever you prefer, you can listen and watch, or you can read through the reports and the documentations. And also as well, because you maybe realize that we are recording the sessions, and we are giving you the chance to also watch all the recorded sessions that we have already now prepared, so that you can look through all the 6 sessions that Petra and we just recapped, and yeah, take your pieces and bits that you want to elaborate more. Petra, do you want to add something here?
I want to thank again Eveline and Garry, and I would like to thank Roslina. We are terribly sad that the internet just didn't allow you to give your presentations. We'll find a way to honor your inputs, because that is a very, very interesting process. And I would like to thank everybody, the participants, and I must say at this point, big thanks to the tech team in the background, and to all of your support. Otherwise, that wouldn't have been possible. That's from my side. Thank you to everybody. Thanks for your participation, and please take it further. The videos are available on our YouTube channel, and and we will see how to continue with that. We're looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you also from my side. Thank you very much, team. Thank you, contributors. Thank you, participants, for your interactive exchange through the chat. Thank you very much. Have a great evening or great day. Bye-bye.